And we are back for part 19 of Terry Pratchett's Night Watch. Let's go. Vimes lay face down on the table in the watch house, wincing occasionally. "Please hold still," said Dr. Lorne. "I've nearly finished. I suppose you'll laugh if I told you to take it easy." "Ha, ha. Ugh! It's only a flesh wound, but you ought to get some rest." "Ha, ha. You've got a busy night ahead of you. So have I suspect." "We should be okay if we've got the barricades all the way to Easy Street," said Vimes, and was aware of a telling silence. He turned over and sat up on the table that Lorne was using as a bench. "We have got them to Easy Street, haven't we?" he demanded. "The last I heard, yes," said the doctor. "The last you heard?" "Well, technically no," said Lorne. "It's all getting bigger, John. The actual last I heard was someone saying, 'Why stop at Easy Street?'" "Oh, good grief." "Yes, I thought so too." Vimes dragged his breeches up, fastened his belt, and limped out onto the road and an argument. There was Rosie Palm and Sandra and Reg Shoe and half a dozen others sitting around another table in the middle of the street. As Vimes stepped out into the evening, a plaintive voice said, "You cannot fight for reasonably priced love." "You can if you want me and the rest of the girls on board," said Rosie. "Free is not a word we wish to see used in these circumstances." "Oh, very well," said Reg, making a note on a clipboard. "We're all happy with truth, justice and freedom, are we?" "And better sewers." This was the voice of Mrs. Rutherford. "And something done about the rats." I think we should be thinking about higher things, Comrade Mrs. Rutherford," said Reg. "I'm not a comrade, Mr. Shoe, and neither is Mr. Rutherford," said Mrs. Rutherford. "We've always kept to ourselves, haven't we, Sydney?" "I've got a question," said someone in the crowd of onlookers. "Harry Supple's my name. Got a shoe shop in New Cobblers." Reg seized on this as an opportunity to avoid talking to Mrs. Rutherford. Revolutionaries should not have to meet someone like Mrs. Rutherford on their first day. "Yes, Comrade Supple," he said. "Nor are we boy-joys," said Mrs. Rutherford, not willing to let things go. Bourgeoisie," said Reg. "Our manifesto refers to bourgeoisie. It's like bourgeoisie." "Bourgeoisie, bourgeoisie," said Mrs. Rutherford, turning the word over on her tongue. That doesn't sound too bad. What sort of thing do they do?" "Anyway, it says here in Article 7 of this list," Mr. Supple ploughed on. "People's Declaration of the glorious 24th of May," said Reg. Yeah, right. Well, it says we'll seize hold of the means of production, sort of thing. So what I want to know is, how does that work out regarding my shoe shop? I mean, I'm in it anyway, right? It's not like there's room for more than me and my lad Garbett, and maybe one customer." In the dark, Vimes smiled, but Reg could never see stuff coming. But after the revolution, all property will be held in common by the people. That is, it'll belong to you, but also to everyone else, you see?" Comrade Supple looked puzzled. "But I'll be the one making shoes?" "Of course, but everything will belong to the people." "So who's going to pay for the shoes?" said Mr. Supple. "Everyone will pay a reasonable price for their shoes, and you won't be guilty of living off the sweat of the common worker," said Reg shortly. "Now, if we—" "You mean the cows?" said Supple. "What?" "Well, there's only the cows and the lads at the tannery, and frankly all they do is stand in a field all day. Well, not the tannery boys, obviously, but—" "Look," said Reg, "everything will belong to the people, and everyone will be better off. Do you understand?" The shoemaker's frown began to deepen. He wasn't certain if he was part of the people. "I thought we just didn't want soldiers down our street and mobs and all that lot," he said. Reg had a hunted look. He made a dive for safety. "Well, at least we can agree on truth, freedom and justice, yes?" There was a chorus of nods. Everyone wanted those. They didn't cost anything. A match flared in the dark, and they turned to see Vimes light a cigar. "You'd like freedom, truth and justice, wouldn't you, Comrade Sergeant?" said Reg encouragingly. "I'd like a hard-boiled egg," said Vimes, shaking the match out. There was some nervous laughter, but Reg looked offended. "In the circumstances, Sergeant, I think we should set our sights a little higher." "Well, yes, we could," said Vimes, coming down the steps. He glanced at the sheets of paper in front of Reg. The man cared. He really did. And he was serious. He really was. "But, well, Reg, tomorrow the sun will come up again, and I'm pretty sure that whatever happens we won't have found freedom, and there won't be a whole lot of justice, and I'm damn sure we won't have found truth. But it's just possible that I might get a hard-boiled egg. What's this all about, Reg?" "The People's Republic of Treacle Mine Road," said Reg proudly. "We're forming a government." "Oh, good," said Vimes. "Another one. Just what we need. Now, does any of you know where my damn barricades have gone?" "Hello, Mr. Keel," said a glutinous voice. He looked down beside him. There, still wearing his hugely oversized coat, but now with the addition of a helmet much too large for him, was Nobby Nobbs. "How did you get there, Nobby?" "My mum says I'm insidious," said Nobby, grinning. A concertina sleeve rose in the vicinity of Nobby's head, and Vimes realised that somewhere in there was a salute. "She's right," said Vimes. "So I'm an acting constable now, Sarge," said Nobby. "Mr. Colin said so. Gave me a spare helmet. I'm carving myself a badge out of what's that, like waxy, kind of like candles, but you can't eat it?" "Soap, Nobby. Remember the word." "Right, Sarge. Then I'm going to carve a—" "Where have the barricades gone, Nobby?" "That'll cost—" "I'm your sergeant, Nobby. We are not in a financial relationship. Tell me where the bloody barricades are." Probably near to Short Street, Sarge. It's all got a bit metaphysical, Sarge." Major Clive Mountjoy Standfast stared blankly at the map in front of him, trying to find some comfort. He was, tonight, the senior officer in the field. The commanders had gone to the palace for some party or other, and he was in charge. Vimes had conceded that the city's regiments had quite a few officers who weren't fools. Admittedly, they got fewer the higher you went, but by accident or design every army needs, in key if unglamorous posts, men who can reason and make lists and arrange for provisions and baggage wagons, and in general have an attention span greater than that of a duck. It's their job to actually run things, leaving the commanding officer free to concentrate on higher matters. And the Major was, indeed, not a fool, even though he looked like one. He was idealistic, and thought of his men as jolly good chaps, despite the occasional evidence to the contrary, and on the whole did the best he could with the moderate intelligence at his disposal. When he was a boy, he'd read books about great military campaigns, and visited the museums, and had looked with patriotic pride at the paintings of famous cavalry charges, last stands, and glorious victories. It had come as rather a shock, when he later began to participate in some of these, to find that the painters had unaccountably left out the intestines. Perhaps they just weren't very good at them. The Major hated the map. It was the map of a city. A city wasn't a place for cavalry, for heaven's sake. Of course, there had been casualties among the men. 3 of them had been deaths. Even a cavalry helmet is not a lot of use against a ballistic cobblestone. And a trooper had been pulled off his horse in Dolly Sisters and, bluntly, mobbed to death. And that was tragic and terrible, and unfortunately inevitable, once fools had decided to use cavalry in a city with as many alleys as Ankh-Morpork. The Major didn't think of his superiors as fools, of course, since that would follow that everyone who obeyed them were fools. He used the term unwise, and felt worried when he used it. As for the rest of the casualties, 3 of them had been men knocked senseless by riding into hanging shop signs while pursuing, well, people when it came down to it, because with the smoke and darkness who could tell who the real enemy was? The idiots had apparently assumed that anyone running away was the enemy, and they'd been the luckier idiots, because men who rode their horses into dark alleys, which twisted this way and that, and got narrower and narrower, and then realised that it had all gone quiet and their horse couldn't turn around, well, They were men who learned how fast a man could run in cavalry boots. He toted up the reports. Broken bones, bruises, one man suffering from friendly stab by a comrade's sabre. He looked across the makeshift table at Captain Tom Wrangle of Lord Salacci's light infantry, who glanced up from his own paperwork and gave him a weak smile. They'd been at school together, and Wrangle, the Major knew, was a lot brighter than him. "What's it look like to you, Tom?" said the Major. "We've lost nearly 80 men," said the Captain. "What? That's terrible." "Oh, about 60 of them are deserters, as far as I can see. You tend to get that in this sort of mess. Some have probably just popped off to see dear old Mum." "Oh, deserters. We've had some of those too. In the cavalry. What would you call a man who leaves his horse behind?" "An infantryman?" "As for the rest, well, as far as I can see, only 6 or 7 of them went down to definite enemy action. 3 men got stabbed in alleyways, for example." "Sounds like enemy action to me." "Yes, Clive, but you were born in Quern." "Only because my mother was visiting her aunt and the coach was late," said the Major, going red. "If you cut me in half, you'll find Ankh-Morpork written on my heart." "Really? Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that," said Tom. "Anyway, getting murdered in alleyways is just part of life in the big city." "But they were armed men. Swords, helmets." "Valuable loot, Clive." "But I thought the City Watch took care of the gangs." Tom looked at his friend over the top of his paperwork. "Are you suggesting that we ask for police protection? Anyway, there isn't any, not any more. Some of the watchmen are with us, for what good they are, and the rest have either got beaten up or run away." "More deserters?" "Frankly, Clive, everyone's drifting away so fast that by tomorrow we'll be feeling pretty lonely." The men paused as a corporal brought in some more messages. They thumbed through them gloomily. "Well, it's gone quiet anyway," said the Major. "Supper time," said the Captain. The Major threw up his hands. "This isn't war. A man throws a rock, walks around the corner, and he's an upstanding citizen again. There's no rules." Sounds familiar. The Captain nodded. Their training hadn't covered this sort of thing. They'd studied maps of campaigns with broad sweeping plains and the occasional patch of a high ground that had to be taken. Cities were to be laid siege to or defended. They weren't for fighting in. You couldn't see, you couldn't group, you couldn't manoeuvre, and you were always going up against people who knew the place like it was their own kitchen, and you definitely didn't want to fight an enemy that had no uniform. "Where's your lordship?" said the Captain. "Gone to the ball, same as yours." "And what were your orders, may I ask?" "He told me to do whatever I considered necessary to carry out our original objectives." "Did he write that down?" "No," said the Major. "Pity, neither did mine." They looked at one another, and then Wrangle said, "Well, there's no actual unrest at the moment, as such. My father said all this happened in his time. He said it's best just to keep a lid on it. There's only a limited number of cobblestones, he said." "It's almost 10, said the Major. "People will be going to bed soon, surely." Their joint expression radiated the fervent hope that it had all calmed down. No one in their right mind wanted to be in a position where he was expected to do what he thought best. "Well, Clive, provided there's no—" the Captain began. There was a commotion outside the tent, and then a man stepped inside. He was blood-stained and smoke-blackened, his face lined with pink where sweat had trickled through the dreadful grime. A crossbow was slung across his back, and he'd acquired a bandolier of knives. And he was mad. The Major recognised the look. The eyes were too bright, the grin too fixed. "All right," he said, and removed the large brass knuckle-duster from his right hand. "Sorry about your sentry, gentlemen, but he didn't want to let me in, even though I gave him the password. Are you in charge?" "Who the hell are you?" said the Major, standing up. The man seemed unimpressed. "Carcer. Sergeant Carcer," he said. "A sergeant? In that case you can—" "From Cable Street," Carcer added. Now the Major hesitated. Both the soldiers knew about the unmentionables, although, if asked, they probably wouldn't have been able to articulate exactly what it was they knew. Unmentionables worked in secret, behind the scenes. They were a lot more than just watchmen. They reported directly to the patrician. They had a lot of pull. You didn't mess with them. They were not people to cross. It didn't matter that this man was only a sergeant. He was an unmentionable. And what was worse, the Major realised, the creature could see that what he was thinking and was enjoying the view. "Yeah," said Carcer, "that's right, and it's lucky for you that I'm here, soldier boy." Soldier boy, thought the Major, and there were men listening who'd remember that. Soldier boy. "How so?" he said. "While you and your shiny soldiers have been prancing around chasing washerwomen," said Carcer, pulling up the tent's only vacant chair and sitting down, "the real trouble's been happening down in Treacle Mine Road. You know that?" "What are you talking about? We haven't had any reports about disturbances down there, man." "Yeah, right. Don't you think that's strange?" The Major hesitated. A vague memory bobbed at the back of his mind, and there was a grunt from the captain, who pushed a piece of paper across to him. He glanced at it and recalled. "One of my captains was down there this afternoon and said everything was under control," he said. "Really? Whose control?" said Carcer. He leaned back in his chair and put his boots on the desk. The Major stared at them, but the boots showed no sign of embarrassment. "Remove your feet from my desk," he said coldly. Carcer's eyes narrowed. "You and whose army?" he said. "Mine, as a matter of fact." The Major looked into Carcer's eyes and wished he hadn't. Mad. He'd seen eyes like that on the battlefield. Very slowly, with exaggerated care, Carcer swung his feet off the table. Then he pulled out a handkerchief made grimy with unguessable humours, huffed theatrically at the wood, and polished it industriously. "I do beg your pardon so very much," he said. "However, while you gentlemen have been keeping your desk nice and clean, a canker, as they say, ha, is eating at the very heart of the city. Has anyone told you that the Cable Street watch house has been burnt to the ground, with, we believe, the loss of the lives of poor Captain Swing and at least one of our technical people?" "Swing, by gods," said Captain Wrangle. "That is what I said. All the scum you lads have been driving out of Dolly's sisters and all the other nests, well, they've ended up down there." The Major looked at the report. "But our patrol said that everything seemed to be in hand. The watch were very visible on the streets and people were showing the flag and singing the national anthem," he said. "There you are then," said Carcer. "Do you ever sing the national anthem in the street, Major?" "Well, no." Who did his lordship send down there?" said Wrangle. Major Mountjoy Standfast thumbed through his papers. His face fell. "Rust," he said. "Oh dear, that's a blow." "I dare say the man's dead," said Carcer, and the Major tried not to look slightly more cheerful. "The person in charge down there now calls himself Sergeant Keel, but he's an impostor. The real Keel is in the mortuary." "How do you know all this?" said the Major. "We in the particulars have ways of finding things out," said Carcer. "I've heard," murmured the captain. "Martial law, gentlemen. That means the military comes to the aid of the civil power," said Carcer, "and that's me right now. Of course, you could send a couple of runners up to the ball, but I don't reckon that would be a good career move. So what I'm asking is for you men to assist us with a little surgical strike." The Major stared at him. There was now no limit to the distaste he had for Carcer. But he hadn't been a major for very long, and when you've just been promoted, you hope to stay that way long enough for the braid to get a tarnish. He forced himself to smile. "You and your men have had a long day, Sergeant," he said. "Why don't you go along to the mess tent while I consult with my fellow officers?" Carcer moved with a suddenness that made the Major flinch. The sergeant stood up and then leaned forward with his knuckles on the desk. "You do that, Sonny Jim?" he said, with a grin like the edge of a rusty saw. Then he turned and strode out into the night. In the silence that followed, the captain said, "His name is on the list of officers that Swing sent us yesterday, I'm afraid, and, he is technically correct about the law." "You mean we have to take orders from him?" "No, but he's entitled to request our assistance." "Am I entitled to refuse?" "Oh, yes, of course, but—" I'd have to tell his lordship why," said the Major. "Exactly." "But that man's an evil bastard. You know the sort. The kind that joins up for the pillaging. The kind you have to end up hanging as an example to the men." Said Captain Wrangle. "What now?" Well, he's right about one thing. I've been looking at the reports and, well, it's odd. It's been very quiet down towards Treacle Mine Road. Well, that's good, isn't it? It's unbelievable, Clive, when you put it all together. Even the watch house didn't get attacked, says here. And your Captain Burns says he met this Keel chap or someone who said he was Keel, and he says if that man's a watch sergeant, then he, Burns, is a monkey's uncle. He said that man is used to serious command. I think he rather took to him, to tell you the truth. Ye gods, Tom, I need some help here, said the Major. Then send out some gallopers right away. A little informal patrolling, perhaps. Get some proper intelligence. You can afford to wait half an hour. Right. Good idea, said the Major, steaming with relief. See to it, could you? After the flurry of orders, he sat back and stared at the map. Some things at least made sense. All these barricades looked inwards. People were barricading themselves against the palace and the centre of the city. No one could be bothered much about the outside world. If you had to take an outlying part of the city in these circumstances, then the thing to do would be to go in via a gatehouse in the city wall. They might not be quite so guarded as they ought to be. Tom? Yes, Clive? Have you ever sung the national anthem? Oh, lots of times, sir. I don't mean officially. You mean just to show I'm patriotic? Good gods, no. That would be a rather odd thing to do, said the captain. And how about the flag? Well, obviously I salute it every day, sir. But you don't wave it at all? The Major inquired. I think I waved a paper one a few times when I was a little boy, Patrician's birthday or something. We stood in the streets as he rode by and we shouted hurrah. Never since then? Well, no, Clive, said the captain, looking embarrassed. I'd be very worried if I saw a man singing the national anthem and waving the flag, sir. It's really a thing foreigners do. Really? Why? We don't need to show we're patriotic, sir. I mean, this is Ankh-Morpork. We don't have to make a big fuss about being the best, sir. We just know. And that's the end of part 19, and Anna will see you next time.